I will speak in the context of the budget to also say that in the context of a democracy, all of us must become more familiar with how the budget process works. We can only deal with what we finally get as appropriation by the elected representatives of us, the people. Now, when that budget is passed, it is not cash. It is an approval to spend a certain agreed sum on identified areas. And I think this is important for members of the public. So when you hear that, oh, a budget has been approved for a ministry or a department, it isn't cash. Now, we are seeing that since May, when the budget was passed, about 300 billion has been paid out by way of releases. That has to be so because the money is then gathered from sale of crude oil, from taxes that come in, and from all other proceeds from where government earns money. And then the hard choices begin. Who goes first? Now, out of that 300 billion plus or minus, my ministries, 3 ministries, have received 102 billion, to be specific. Now, it has been described as a lion's share of 300 billion, but it is a lion's share against our realities. Our realities are that we inherited 206 roads under construction, and the liabilities for those roads were in the sum of 2.1 trillion naira, out of which government had paid about 600 or 700 billion naira. So the story that we met were contractors, whether in works, power particularly, and works, saying that over the last 2 to 3 years, they haven't been paid. So that was when the seeds of this recession were sown. Money increasingly leaving the economy, leaving the hands of people who work on a day-to-day basis. The result was that workers were being laid off gradually, progressively, and systematically. And as workers lost their job, money stopped moving because they stopped buying, they lacked purchasing power, so those who were selling were also losing their livelihood. That is the story to where we are today. Now, how do we get out of it? Our way out of it is a fiscal spending, an increased budgetary size. Ambitious because we go from an average of 4 trillion, which was the average budget size in this country for almost half a decade, where we were earning $100 per barrel of oil a day. We were budgeting averagely 4 trillion. We're going now from there to a budget of 6 trillion when we are earning less than that, significantly less than that. It's ambitious. Now, but what has also changed? And for those who say they haven't seen change, let me dimension that also. What has changed is that from spending 10 to 15% of our budget on capital and spending 85 to 90% on recurrent, this government has committed to now spending 30% of 6 trillion on capital and 70% on recurrent. Now, how does that affect you and I? It means first that in government circles, the people who work in government usually constitute barely 1% or 2% of the entire population. So a government that continuously chose to spend 90% of its earnings on 1% or 2% of the population, leaving 10% for all the contractors, for all the roads, for all the suppliers, clearly was on a path to where we are today. Now, what is changing is that government, this administration is freeing that space and saying that the 2% who work in government must take less so that more goes to those who work in the larger space. Now, how is that impacting? With the 102 billion that we have received, as at the 29th of July, we have paid out 70 billion to contractors, project managers, consultants who are designing roads and bridges, who haven't received money for about 2.5 years. We're paying out on the condition and on the commitment and understanding that they will begin to re-employ back workers that they had laid off. And that is the path to growth. That is the way out of this recession. Begin to spend on the productive sector. So that at every construction site, not only do we see plants and equipment and machinery back and working, we will see demand for supply of diesel, petrol, water tankers begin to move, sale of sand, granite begins to happen, food vendors move back to those sites to supply rice, food, water to those who are working, and so on and so forth. Query activity begins. That is the way out. There is no other way. That is the stimulus spending that happened in America. That is the Marshall Plan in Europe. That was the Roosevelt Plan after the Great Depression. So we are not doing anything unusual. What is different now is that we're working with leaner resources and seeking to do more with less. Now, where have we mobilized contractors? Contractors are back on Kano Katsina, they are back on Kano Maiduguri, they are back on Ilori Jeba, they are back on Loko Oweto, they are back on Lagos Ibadan Expressway, they are back on Port Harcourt Enugu Road, and quite a number of other routes. And we are paying out more as we speak. Also, what are we doing in terms of power with the money that we have? We are trying to complete the Kaduna power plant, the 215 megawatt power plant. We are trying to complete the transmission line for the Gurara 40 megawatt plant. We are also trying to complete the Kashimbila plant and some of the other NIPP projects. We are also remobilizing contractors back to the transmission sites, because as we generate the power, we must evacuate it. And many of the transmission projects have also stopped because contractors were not paid. They couldn't clear some of the equipment that they imported. Many have been trapped in the port for almost a decade. So we're trying to free all of those out. They are owing clearing agents and all of that in excess of about 3 billion. So we're working with the Office of the Vice President, also meeting with all these people, trying to sort out who owes what, and also ensure that money, when ultimately spent, is spent for value. But progress is being made on transmission work. Transmission work is going on in Irua. We've completed the one in Okada. We had a problem in Itu local government last month, but I am happy to report that progress is back on. There were some spiritual issues, I was told, community issues obviously, and they invoked some spiritual causes, and the contractors left side. Anyway, they are back and trying to complete the last mile. And just yesterday, again, I visited Damboa in transmission power plant in Borno State. The contractor who had left site as a result of the violence and the insecurity there is back on track, and he says that he can finish that project by the end of this year. And when all of this come together, clearly we will begin to see life getting back to normal. Again, we must just stay focused. It's a tough time. We are mindful, but we think that our methods will work.